This is Chris Sims.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
This is Danielle Smith, and welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Tuesday. How's everybody doing today? Before we get on to a few items in regards to, well, I don't know, everything S&P, how about we start here? Precious metals can be thought of as the ultimate insurance policy against economic uncertainty and government incompetence, with deficit spending and fiscal irresponsibly. Man, welcome to Tuesday, folks. Unlikely to end anytime soon, now is the time to protect a portion of your hard-earned savings with a form of money that has been recognized for thousands of years. This is going to be the worst ad read ever. Oh my goodness. Silver Gold Bull. Yes, of course I'm talking silver and gold. They are my go-to for precious metals with their complete in-house solutions, whether buying, selling, storing, or adding precious metals to your retirement accounts. They have a new feature exclusively for you, the S&P listener. That's the Royal Canadian Mint silver coins that for the same price as a generic silver round. Dear me, am I going to screw this entire thing up? It feels like it. Text or email Grahame for all the details down in the show notes. Shaun's tongue ain't working worth a hoot today, so I'm already apologizing to Kristen McGowan, who is running for Division 7 Northwest School Division trustee position. She says she's running because she believes in the potential of every child and the power of education to shape their future. She's committed to ensuring that our schools provide the best possible resources and opportunities for all students, while also promoting fiscal responsibility and collaboration among educators, parents, and the community. The three key issues she wants to see addressed in the election: parental rights and inclusive education policies, funding and resource allocation, and curriculum changes and monitoring of new testing policies adopted. So best of luck to Kristen McGowan. If you're in the Northwest School Division, make sure to throw her some consideration. That's Kristen McGowan of McGowan Chartered Accountants. RecTech Power Products. For over 20 plus years, they've been committed to excellence in the power sports industry. They have Alberta-built aluminum trailers from Lethbridge, utility trailers, dump trailers, goosenecks. The aluminum gives you the lighter pull with all the ability to haul large payloads. They're strong. That's right. And they are Alberta-built, sitting at the west side of Lloyd here. If you haven't been to the west side of Lloyd to stop into RecTech, you really should go see their showroom. You got a few good days left, I hope, before the snow starts to fly. And you could stop in, maybe test something out, go see Ryan, talk about demoing a couple other things. I've got to hop on a couple different things. A Riker, that was a lot of fun. And then the Ego dirt bike. They got lawnmowers and golf carts and side-by-sides. They got everything there, boats and Sea-Doo. Like, it just goes on and on and on. RecTechPowerProducts.com. They're open Monday through Saturday. Ignite Distribution out of Wainwright, Alberta. They can supply industrial, safety, welding, and automotive parts. They got on-site inventory management. So when you're, touring around on the Riker or whatever your purchase from RecTech is, you can be assured that Shane Stafford and team will make sure you don't run out of what it is that makes your business hum along. Give them a call, 780-842-3433. Substack, it's free to subscribe to. This every Sunday right now, we've got the week in review. That's free to everybody. There is a paid portion at the end, which gives you a preview of what's coming up this week. But with rattling off 5 a week, I get it. But if you want to hear the late-breaking news, that's where to go. We announced Kaylin Ford's the newest speaker for the Cornerstone Forum. That's where you heard it first. So if you're wanting to be up to date on everything S&P, Substack, it's free to subscribe to, folks. If you want to become a paid subscriber, appreciate it. And there's going to be some things that we do. We did our first guest edition. We had Matt Arrett, right? We got another one coming up this Wednesday. Lisa Myron, the lawyer, Lisa Myron, is going to be writing one in for us. And so that's going to be partially for paid subscribers. So if you're interested in things like that, there's a few things we're doing value add that we hope you'll like. And certainly there. Friday, November 29th, S&P Christmas Party, bringing in the dueling pianos to the Cornerstone, to the Gold Horse Casino here in Lloydminster. I got 4 tables left and only about a week, maybe 10 days left to squeak in if there's a business out there that wants to have a table for the dueling pianos. And after that, we're gonna have to cut off ticket sales. So if that is you, make sure to shoot me a text down the show notes. Would love to have you there. Cornerstone Forum 2025, heading to Calgary at the Winsport May 10th. We've got an excellent lineup. We're continuing to announce. We just announced this week Kalen Ford's going to be there. We got Tom Luongo, Alex Craner, Chuck Prodnick. We got guest host Chris Sims and Tom Bodrovics. So that is going to be an exciting day, May 10th in Calgary. You can get your early bird tickets. Down in the show notes, there's a link. But you can get your early bird tickets right now. They're not going to get any cheaper. And this is all made possible by two companies stepping up to take it to Calgary. That's Silver Gold Bull and Bow Valley Credit Union. So my hat's off to both those companies for twisting my arm a little bit to take it to Calgary. So that's going to be a lot of fun. May 10th, 2025. And expect more updates and pay attention to Substack. That's where we're going to announce first. That's where you can find out everything and get caught up on everything SNP. All right, let's get on to that tale of the tape. He spent 7 years as a Saskatchewan MLA. He's the former president and CEO of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and he's co-founded Garrison Strategy. I'm talking about Tim McMillan, so buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Tim McMillan. So Tim, thank you, sir, for hopping on.
No, glad to.
If people want to go back, it is a long freaking time ago, but I did an archive interview. So the city of Lloydminster hired me to do a series of archive interviews for the Lloydminster Archives, and you were one of them. So if people want to go back and hear your life story and a bit of the ins and outs, we did that. I think I did that recording off the back of my deck because it was at the very start of COVID when nobody was allowed to go anywhere. So that would be, I don't even know if I want to go back and listen to it myself. That's such a strange time to go back to, but you can. For the person who doesn't know who Tim is, maybe briefly, just give us a little quick history of who you are.
Sure. Grew up on a farm just north of Lashburn. Family's still there. I got elected to the Saskatchewan legislature in 2007, was part of Brad Wall's government, served as the Minister of Energy, served in a couple other portfolios, then went to Calgary and worked for the oil and gas industry for about 8 years as the president of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And now am consulting, doing mainly oil and gas and resource development work, and maybe a specialty on government relations and advocacy and engaging with Canadians.
Well, this will be weird because we're recording this just before the Saskatchewan live election coverage where Brad Wall is supposed to be joining us. So I was going to say you could say something, but it will actually air about 12 hours after. So that's backwards. What was serving under Brad Wall like?
It was awesome. It was a time where I think Saskatchewan had been kind of getting a lot of confidence that for a long time we were told that Saskatchewan can't be prosperous, that our young people are always going to leave. And Brad came along and said, that's not true. We have everything here to be one of the strongest provinces in Confederation. And when we formed government in 2007, the energy sector was looking to invest in Saskatchewan, uranium, potash. It was a time where I think Saskatchewan really changed the way it saw itself. And the constituents of Lloydminster were extremely supportive of this type of Saskatchewan, which was very entrepreneurial and confident. And it was a great experience to be part of that.
Well, you talk about seeing Saskatchewan, seeing themselves differently. When you have, I want to start here because it was Trudeau's words, right? That there's no, what did he say? There's no case for Canadian natural gas, Canadian oil, right? Like that. And when you hear that, right, there's going to be how many millions of Canadians that go, oh, yeah, he's right, right? And then there's how many millions that are going, what is this idiot doing? And I say, I can say some choice words about it. But folks, I mean, I think there's a lot of us sitting in Western Canada. What is this guy doing? You got to see a Saskatchewan, as I'm assuming, that maybe undervalued what it had to offer. And then under that time, started to expand into so many different things. Even, where I sit, seeing the oil and gas industry around Lloydminster, like boom on the Saskatchewan side was something. When you hear a prime minister, I should say, Prime Minister Trudeau for a few more months, when you hear him say that, sitting where you sit, what is the case to be made for Canadian oil and gas?
It's tough to hear him say that. Having worked on behalf of the oil and gas industry for 8 years, where it seemed like at every turn he and his government went out of their way to make it more difficult to invest in Canadian oil and gas. They canceled Northern Gateway, they canceled Energy East, they did no favors to the LNG industry. We saw, I think, 16 major LNG facilities that were trying to get through the regulatory process to throw their hands up in the air and quit. Then we have Russia invade Ukraine. We have the German chancellor over here begging for Canada to be a good partner and friend and get LNG over there so that they can keep the lights on. And our prime minister says, no, there's no business case for it. Well, there most certainly is a business case for it. As hard as he has tried over the last several years to make it too difficult to get through the regulatory process, I think that our customers are asking for it. We have the resources to be a good partner and friend to democracies around the world. And what it'll take is some infrastructure, building the pipelines, building the LNG facilities. But we've got hundreds and hundreds of years of natural gas to supply the world.
When would you say then it is a problem with just leadership? So do you think it's just Trudeau that is the issue? Or do you think there's a portion of the population, right? Because like climate change and shutting down fossil fuels and all these different terms that are used to surround oil and gas. What is the biggest, roadblock between, because like, I mean, if you just go from, it's almost, I can't do the dance in that Germany's a NATO country. We're supposed to be dealing with it. This isn't some country. This isn't, I don't know. Take your pick, folks. As somebody on the other side, this isn't China. We could say, we could get into, well, China is an enemy or whatever you want to call it. But like Germany's a NATO country. They come asking, and instead of us being, oh yeah, absolutely, we're going to do it. We don't do that. So is that just an issue with leadership, or is that a problem around the maybe a larger problem, if you would, around the population? And trying to unravel this, I don't know, this mess we have.
I think it's both. And I should say it wasn't just Germany. South Korea's prime minister came over asking, we need Canadian gas. We had Japan's president come over and say, Canada, would you build infrastructure? We need Canadian gas. So there has been calls from many of our allies around the world for this. So where does it come from? We saw back in the 90s, the forestry sector was under attack, and there were global environmental activists and the Pew Foundation and US foundations funding anti-Canadian development in our forests. We then saw them shift to oil and gas in the mid-early 2000s, the tar sands campaign maybe being the most well-funded. But there are these international groups, extremely well-funded, that are, I would argue, anti-capitalist more than they are anti-oil and gas. But oil and gas is the root of modern society. And they've been very effective at pushing politicians to limit the infrastructure to enable the way we live. And as damaging as it has been, and Germany's a great example, they are a country where their activists pushed their politicians to depend on wind and solar to such an extent that the reality was that they were shutting down their fossil fuel system, relying on Russia to be their main supply. And then they told their citizens, look, we're building windmills and solar panels that don't work 72% of the time. And that's where they got into trouble. Canada, fortunately, has such a great resource base that we aren't in that sort of vulnerability. But it's the same activists that are pushing the current government, who I would say was looking to get pushed. If you look at the current environment minister, he had a career as the leader of Ecoterre, an environmental activist group. He got arrested for some of the stunts he was doing. The Prime Minister's principal secretary, Jerry Butts, was the president of World Wildlife Fund. So the activists were very integrated into the Liberal Party, and it really has driven a lot of what they've done over the last decade.
So how much, I think about this, I'm like, okay, we're in this really interesting time right now. I'm gonna start I'm going to start with a little. Yeah, I'm going to go a little further out, and then I'm going to come back in. How important is Trump versus Kamala then for Canadian oil specifically? If you look at Donald Trump gets in, or Kamala Harris gets in, does either one, you go, well, this could be good or bad?
So, actually, can I go back just for 1 second and then come
Sure.
to your question? I think over the last decade, and maybe even a little bit earlier, we saw the activist groups that were pushing to get off of oil and gas be very successful globally. In Germany, they made a bunch of really dumb decisions that made them vulnerable. It drove up costs. We saw that around the world. Canada maybe was uniquely enamored by this activist class, and we made some pretty dumb decisions for sure. But in the last 5 years, the pushback by everyday Canadians, the ones that actually are paying double and triple for electricity or for gasoline, or are seeing blackouts because they shut down the gas coming out of Russia, the average citizens are pushing back. And we are seeing pro-energy, right of center governments being elected through Europe, where you never would have expected them. You see farmers that are the same activists are pushing against agriculture, are shutting down the economy, shutting down roads, saying you will not take away our tools like nitrogen fertilizer. So I see that happening in Canada, that people are no longer willing to accept this glorious future that's cost free and risk free because they're currently paying the costs and seeing the risks. And now to into the Kamala Trump phenomenon, I think the same thing that's happening in Europe, the same thing that we see in the polling in Canada is happening in the U.S. That U.S. citizens are no longer willing to accept this hope and change. We don't need to worry about something as simple as energy or electricity because this brave future that is going to rescue us all from ourselves. I think that is pushing both of them. That Kamala was very anti-energy for most of her career, and in the last 6 months, she has found a new love for hydraulic fracturing, and at least she says she is, because the public is is making that a priority. So we have seen, on their face, Donald Trump was very pro-energy. He approved Keystone. He wanted to get it done. Kamala as VP and her President Biden canceled Keystone on their first day. So there's two camps, and one is very much off of the current energy paradigm to something that's risky and expensive, and Donald Trump, which has traditionally been very grassrootsy on these issues. I think coming out of the election, those two trends probably continue, regardless of what's been said on the campaign trail. That the base that is behind the Democratic Party is very much the same base that pushed the Liberal Party in Canada to really try and throttle back the energy sector. I don't see that changing under Biden and Harris as VP. They put moratoriums on drilling on federal lands. There's a long list of things they did. I don't see that getting reversed. There's an argument to be said that if Trump gets in, he would make it more efficient for investment in the U.S. energy sector, which may pull some of the capital out of Canada. I think, and that may be true. I think net though, Canada has great resources. They're very economic. Even if the U.S. has a more efficient system, they are our largest customer. It's where the bulk of our gas, the bulk of our oil goes to. That having a pro-energy government in the U.S. is always going to be good for us. And it may look like some Canadian gas being exported through U.S. LNG terminals because we can't build ours fast enough. But having a good relationship with a pro-energy government is going to serve our interests.
Yeah, if Trump gets in, one of the interesting things, we were talking about this the other day, is he's very pro-United States. So
Yeah.
although he might say nice things about Canada, he's not Canadian, right?
Nope.
So you might like Canadian oil and gas, but he is pro-United States. So would you see, if you're sitting in the oil world, if he gets elected, is there any chance, Keystone, is there any way that gets brought back up? Or do you see maybe something different where if they're gonna, because he's huge on bringing everything back to the United States, is there a way that there actually could be some hurt if Donald Trump? I hate to even say that, but like, is there any way some hurt could come to Canadian oil producers if Donald Trump gets in because he's going to be so pro oil and gas, but his oil and gas?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that is an important thing to think through. In general, though, I think big picture, something like Keystone enables US refineries to have redundancy, and probably the most efficient feedstock for most US refineries is Canadian bitumen. They were built to do heavy oil, either out of Mexico's heavy basin or out of Venezuela's heavy basin or out of Canada's heavy basin. Mexico and Venezuela are basket cases, so having Keystone serves the US interests. And that's why they want it. They don't want to do it to do Canada a favor. They want to do it because it's good for the US. The US is growing their production dramatically, but it's all light oil. Now, they could push that through their heavy based refineries, but the more efficient model would be to strengthen the pipeline ties to Canada and ship the US increased light oil somewhere else or into different refineries. So we shouldn't be thinking if the US is going to do us any favors under Trump or Harris. I don't think either of them are going to do us any favors. If it serves their interests, then they will do it. And the value proposition of Canada of high quality, reliable, environmentally responsibly produced, and competitively priced, I think that we can very easily be a supplier of choice for the U.S. and we shouldn't worry about that. But we also need to make decisions like how do we get pipelines to our own coasts so we aren't 100% reliant on the U.S. playing fair, and having a northern gateway would give us another access point out. So if the U.S. doesn't want our oil or doesn't want to wants to do something that would be punitive, we have an alternative.
So then, how important is the next Canadian election? Because like, have somebody that's, I don't know, Canada first, although it enjoys having a big friendly neighbor to the south of us, would do things in our best interests. How important is the next Prime Minister of Canada?
I think incredibly important that you can run through a few scenarios. If we look back 10 years, the Harper government was using terms like Canada as an energy superpower. How does Canada position itself to be relevant, to be a good partner to our allies, to be economically prosperous? And then Trudeau gets elected, and kind of his narrative, his tone is Canada's back. We're going to be global citizens. He would go to Davos or to the Global Climate Conference and say, we are now going to be climate leaders. We're going to be known for our resourcefulness, not our resources, and put us on a very different track. And that track was the canceling of pipelines, the legislation like Bill C-69, putting an emissions cap on oil and gas, clean electricity regs. So we've done that for a decade. We've kind of muddled through. We have managed to maintain and in some places increase our ability to supply a world that is using more oil and gas, but nothing near our potential. And you can only miss your potential for so long before people start looking other places. I think the next election, which will happen within the next 12 months, is going to be a huge one for Canada and a huge one for the energy sector.
Yeah, you hope, actually, over the course of 10 years, how much damage to the oil and, like all these different regulations, right? Like this different track we're on. The polls here in Canada say Pierre Poilievre is going to get in. I'm not a big poll guy. I don't love it, but we're going to go off of it anyways. And you go, okay, so Pierre gets in day one and is pro oil and gas. He goes, Germany, calls him up, ding, we want to supply you. But all these regulations and everything are put into play that are going to hinder us. How quickly can that be changed?
Yeah, it will take time. Something like Bill C-69, the Impact Assessment Act, How you approve an LNG facility or a pipeline is you have to go through this federal act. It will take a new government to change that legislation to enable a more efficient system. Today, nobody is going to start a pipeline project because the last several that have spent over $1 billion each to get these projects to a point where the federal government says, no, you're not going to do it. No one's going to spend $1 billion under the current legislation to get told no. Regardless of how good it is or how engaged the communities along the pipeline are, nobody's going to do it. So it'll take 6 months to a year to change the legislation. Hopefully, in that same time period, investors are looking at Canada. No guarantee that's the case. And at the same time, all those environmental activists are going to be hammering on the new government, on the changes they're making.
Well, then the first thing they should do day one is defund the CBC, and then they wouldn't have a voice. And all of a sudden, nobody cares, and you just carry on with life. Yeah. I don't know, because you're not going to get bad. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're pretty open on this side. But when we see what we've been doing for the last 10 years, I don't think the SMP is having an activist on day one to hammer on a government for trying to make Canada strong and better and open up to global markets like we've been trying to do. It just makes complete sense to me. I don't get it. So like if you're a smart government, get rid of the CBC day one, and then I don't know, where are the activists going?
The activists are extremely effective on social media and through other channels, but I completely agree. The CBC is maybe the one agency that has done more damage to the energy sector than any other government agency. And I think the Conservatives have been very clear about their plans to get rid of it.
Yeah, well, they have been. And you wonder, so there is a way to get back to where Canadians can do business, essentially, right? And when it comes to oil and gas, getting pipelines in the ground and connecting people to that resource, well, which seems pretty, you mentioned Northern Gateway, you mentioned Energy East, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, although it did get done, took billions more dollars. You got Keystone that got shut down. You look at all the things that have been shut down. It'd be interesting to see if things started getting fired back up and started to move that way. It's like, I wonder if that's possible. I wonder if we'll see a day in the next, 5-6 years where the Keystone gets talked about, because you have Trump and Pierre. Is that something that you like? How close was that to being like, oop, it's done and away we go? Like, are we still 5 years away from that, or are we closer than I think?
When I think about what would be the greatest thing ever, that Donald Trump approved Keystone XL and pushed for it to get done, but Biden gets elected day one of his very first announcements on the day that he was sworn in as president of the United States was to cancel Keystone. And that was a bit of a nod to the activists that had donated incredible amounts of money to him. I would love to see if Donald Trump were elected a little over a week from now, that on day one, he says, this is now a nationally important project. The U.S. built the Alaskan pipeline in 10 months from conception to first oil. Like I don't know if it was exactly 10 months, but it was incredibly fast. But is it conceivable that a new president that is ticked off and wants to make a political statement makes it that level of priority? That would be great if they did.
I don't know how much here of Shane Getson, but Shane Getson's been on the show multiple times. He's been talking. Actually, forgive me, Shane. I was literally talking to him before we started this because I wanted to get kind of the latest update. And I'm sitting here going, has he been talking globally about it? For sure, North American wide, about an energy corridor going up into the territories and kind of fast tracking, having a chunk of land that's fast tracked for different projects, so it doesn't have to go through all this, all this shenanigans to get that done. The energy corridor idea, right? Because he's heading to Alaska to talk to him about it there. He's been down in the southern states talking about it there because it's like this idea of like, wow, we could have this chunk of land where it starts connecting us all. Wouldn't that be something? When you hear that idea, What do you think of an energy corridor going through Alberta, and and the fact that I think it's all the western provinces have signed off on it. I think there's one territory that's signed off on it now as well.
Yeah. No, I'd be fully supportive of anything that makes it more efficient to move energy from where we produce it to where it's consumed. Sometimes a corridor can be challenging if there is a corridor, but that's not the right route because we want to go to the west coast instead of south. But the the activists can spin a good tale that this is no longer allowed because it's not on the corridor, but the corridor doesn't line up with where we found a whole bunch of gas or a whole bunch of oil somewhere outside of it. So I don't think it's a silver bullet, but yeah, if we can get something that makes it more efficient, let's do it.
How important, we were talking elections. How important is the Saskatchewan election? Right now, the polls show, and once again, I hate polls because by tomorrow I could be just laughing as you could all be laughing as I say this. But regardless, this is what the polls say this morning as we're leading up to the Saskatchewan election: is the NDP are slightly ahead, slightly ahead. I don't even know what that means, but regardless, and I know what it means, folks. What I mean is, I don't know if I trust the it's Saskatchewan folk. I'm like, who the heck is doing a poll in Saskatchewan? Nobody. They're out working.
Yeah.
If that were to pass, NDP become the next provincial government in Saskatchewan. Good thing, bad thing, oil and gas, or just Saskatchewan in general.
I think it would be very challenging. And we have seen this repeatedly that in Alberta, they have had a long track record of stable pro-energy governments. The NDP was elected for a 4-year term, and we saw capital pull out fairly substantially. In BC, that again had the Liberal government under Christy Clark that was pushing LNG and a lot of resource development there. They've now had an NDP for several years, and we've seen capital pull back. In Saskatchewan, you go back 16 years, it was a very different feeling and investment levels from pre-NDP to or from NDP to the Sask party. And maybe to tie it to how quickly can things happen federally, when we formed government in '07, there was an excitement from businesses in the mining sector, in oil and gas, that realized that this was going to be a pro-investment jurisdiction. And I think that there was a quick uplift of people that were looking to, maybe they had seen properties in Saskatchewan for years and never wanted to pull a trigger under the NDP. When things changed in '07, there was some wind in our sails fairly quickly, and that was very helpful. I would hate to see that go the other way in any province, and it may work to our advantage federally.
Yeah, you've said it multiple times, and one of the things I've been wrestling with is speed of government or time. Like because there's multiple timelines. You think of parenting, and like at times it feels like it takes a long time, but like things happen relatively fast, right? Week by week, essentially. I coach a little U7 right now, Tim, and I think all the world's problems would probably be solved if people just showed up to some U7 hockey and seen those kids working their butts off and having to worry about pee breaks and crying and it's hard and my legs don't work and on, right? It's very like motivating, but that's like that timeline is very fast. How much kids improve in a month is insane. Yeah. But when you look at the time it takes to move projects along, you're talking different things in the oil and gas sector, billion-dollar projects. There's time and investment there. And the changing of the guard of a government, I think you just said, like when it's pro-energy, they can smell that, and it happened real fast. That's '07. And where we sit today, not on the verge, I shouldn't say that, but on the thought that the NDP could get in, is the opposite would be true then as well. If they come in, as you pointed out in Alberta, people will pull out almost immediately when they see that.
Yeah, I think the first thing is people will start looking very closely at their capital budgets, and maybe they have 20% in Saskatchewan and 60% in Alberta and 20% in BC. If material changes happen politically or risk-wise, they will very quickly move the capital dollars around. Then as you go out over the next few years, it's okay, as we're building our capital budget, there's more room for change. And over time, you start to see things like labor legislation changing. It gets more expensive to do work in any given jurisdiction. Regulatory changes. In Alberta, the NDP came out with an emissions cap or a production cap. That again, another signal that this is not a place for growth. This is a place to maintain and shrink an industry. And over time, it just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. So in the short term, there's a few things you'll see, but over time it gets tougher.
That's the signals. The signals is really interesting because you think about that. That's what we're all kind of pay attention to, is all these different signals and where are we heading as a country. Like I go back through COVID, I go back to different things with some very serious problems socially or in the culturally. Like, where are we heading as a culture? And then you talk about, you look at the bigger world and you see some of the governments being elected and some of the voices being heard now. And certainly there's some positive signs. There are some negative ones mixed in there as well. But certainly there's some things going on and people are staring at these signals, trying to figure out where we're heading. One of the reasons I reached out was a guy had asked about Enbridge 5, right? Goes through the states. It's been tied up in giant legal battles. What could that mean for that? Like we're talking about different pipelines. We've talked about a lot that have been shut down. This has been an active pipeline for quite some time. And it is I don't know, it's been like 5 years tied up in courts about possibly shutting it down. What could that mean for, I don't know, maybe just the oil and gas sector as a whole, if that were to come to pass?
It would be very problematic. And I think it's one of those classic cases where after a while, I'll use agriculture as an example. Your family no longer has a relationship to a farm. And after a while, you start to think that milk and meat and cheese comes from the grocery store. And you forget, no, it comes from a farmer and somebody that's worked very hard to produce it. Energy is the same. We have been so wealthy for so long. Energy has been seamless. It's been reliable. And you get gas from the gas pump. You heat your home from the thermostat. This is a classic case where if you were to shut down Line 5, it's fueling refineries in Michigan. And when the people in Michigan either start not being able to refuel their trucks and cars, or it starts to cost substantially more, they then have to reassess, why did we shut down this pipeline in the first place? There's always why don't we turn off the pipeline and see how long it takes until they beg us to turn it back on? We're never actually going to do that, but that seems like the game of chicken we're playing right now.
Why would you never actually do that? Like, is it people will say, oh, because you don't want to be, don't want to treat other human beings like that. But there's way more to running a pipeline than just flicking a switch off and on and expecting you can just, carry on with daily operations like it's honestly like it's a light switch.
Yeah. The reason I think that it never actually happens is it's the complexity of who's responsible, whose oil it is. If this was China, where the central government could just decide we're going to turn this off for a while, that could happen. But in Canada, there's so many contracts of people feeding into the pipeline and contracts of people pulling out of it that no one has the authority to offend all those rights holders, where the opponents that are trying to shut it down don't care. And in some situations, they get so far that it does put the cost back on themselves. It's like a snake biting its own tail.
And that doesn't even get into the complexities of running a pipeline, right? Of like shipping oil down, and keeping it at a temperature that it can flow and not having any issues with the pipeline. You shut that sucker down. Like I remember reading stories about Russia. This is probably 3 years ago, and they'd shut down a pipeline, and then they had issues with like the buildup of, I don't know, this thing called oil, because it's not exactly water, and that's to say there's just I think of the complexities that way. I'm glad you're pointing out the different people who own and the complexities, because there's a lot there when it comes to it. Do you think there's ever a possibility? I mean, obviously there is. When you stare at that Enbridge 5, do you go, man, this is crazy. Why are we even here? Like, because if they shut that down, or have the issues of like everything becomes more expensive, it's not like you flick a light switch and it comes right back on. All this stuff takes time. It's taking time to get it shut down right now. And if it gets shut down, you best believe it's going to take time to get it fired back up too, when everybody's hurting and going, why did we ever do that?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a classic case of activists that don't care, to be quite honest. That I think the activist zeitgeist is, yeah, this may be very tough. We may need to break things to get the change we want, but it's never going to happen unless we do some extreme measures. So they're comfortable with that. Your average everyday citizen isn't engaged in this discussion, and it's only after the costs land on them that they really pay attention and say, how the hell did we get to this point? Um, I think maybe one of the challenges is pipelines are these big, thoughtful organizations that think 6, 7 steps ahead, that they are always, well in advance, where an activist is tomorrow. We're going to show up and we're going to shut this down tomorrow. And on this particular pipeline, it is a pipeline put in place in the 1950s. It runs through Canada, across the Mackinac Straits into Michigan, back underground from there. But it runs along the bottom of the ocean, of the Great Lakes there. So the governor felt that wasn't safe after 60, 70 years. Enbridge said, why don't we build a tunnel then? We don't need one. This can be done safely, but if this is going to meet your needs, we will build a tunnel. No sooner did that plan get put in place than the activists turned against the tunnel. Tunnels aren't safe. And so as soon as you meet the expectation of the opponent, they raise the expectation because they had no interest in actually this succeeding. And if you meet that expectation, they raise it again. So we're in this situation where a tunnel will be built, but that will not make the activists change their opinion.
So maybe before I let you out of here, the question that I'm thinking of is like, okay, how do you get people? Because the activists, there's no, it's the big thing that comes back to conservative governments. They keep trying to appeal to some voters who are never going to vote for them ever. So stop it. Be conservatives. And all of a sudden, you'll get this landslide. You'll probably get a landslide victory at this point because people just want things to make sense. Stop going out and appealing to things that don't make sense to any of us, and that person still ain't going to vote for you. So when you come to this and you talk about this, you're like, okay, you don't want us on the bottom of the Great Lakes, okay? Because I get it, but I mean, we've been doing it for 70 years. I mean, geez, like you might take that into effect, but maybe not. You want us to build this thing, okay? But you know already they're not going to be happy with that. How do you get people to understand two things? One, where all their stuff comes from. Because as you pointed out with agricultural, Quick Dick McDick does a great job of explaining, like this is the farm and this is what you're doing. He also does this with energy quite well.
Yeah.
How do we get, the common person to understand that? And then maybe even one step further to just support oil and gas industry in doing things that are going to make all of our lives better, not worse, when it comes to, all the things we have today. I mean, this bloody conversation right now is possible because of the oil and gas industry.
Yep. I maybe am an eternal optimist, but I feel like the society goes in waves, and I feel like the wave is coming back in our direction. That for the last 15 years, it was that we're in an energy transition, and the fact is we've used more oil and gas each and every year, almost every year for the last 100 years. COVID was a bit of a blip, but we then had record growth after it. So we're on an energy transition in reality to more oil and gas. That's the transition we're on. But we had companies committing to net zero that, on the face of it, you're like that's ridiculous. You're not achieving net zero. But that was very popular. And we had governments that were unwilling to push back against the activists. Activists would say that, going to more wind and solar on our electricity grid was actually lower cost, more reliable. All of that is a lie, but no one actually saw the costs until now. So globally, we're seeing this pushback. We're seeing it on energy consumption. We're seeing it in elections that pro reliable energy governments are getting elected. And I think here in Canada, we're seeing it that Pierre Poilievre, for 2 elections, the Conservative leader could never have an acceptable climate plan. No matter what it was, no one understood what it was. It may have looked very similar to the Liberals' climate plan, but it was inadequate and foolish, according to CBC and others. In this election, Pierre Poilievre's climate plan is, I'm going to axe the tax. And they're like, but what's the plan? And he says, again, what don't you understand? I'm going to axe the tax. And just very plain spoken, people know what he means. He means that the carbon tax is foolish, and anything that puts costs on Canadians or risks on Canadians when we have these substantial resources that can be produced safely and responsibly, that's not going to fly under a different government. So I feel like society has a shorter fuse for BS. They have higher expectations for energy, for jobs. And I think that we have governments that are willing to no longer dance around issues, but it's actually politically to their advantage to be quite blunt about the type of policy change they're going to make. I would argue we saw that play out in British Columbia a couple of weeks ago. A party that had 2 or 3% of the vote 2 years ago is today in recounts to see if they could possibly form that government. And it was a campaign that was very grassrootsy, I would say blunt. It wasn't flashy, but it was just focused on the kitchen table of your average everyday Canadian.
Yeah, we could get into some BC election talk, because I keep staring at that, and the fact, it just amazes me to this point that they can't get an election done in one night. Done. Boom. Here's the winner. We don't have to go down too many rabbit holes to realize that can open up things for fraud and etc. Because it just becomes very attainable. You can see what everything is, where how many votes were won and whatever. And I'm not against recounts. I'm just saying now there's 66,000 mail-in ballots. Okay, there's problems there, very big problems. But your point is exactly correct in the fact that the Conservatives came from nowhere, and I didn't even know, was it 6 months, folks? It was a short timeline. On the mashup, we talked about it. It was just watching this wave of people all of a sudden coming out and voting blue. Like, it was wild. And
Can I make
sure.
I have a call to action here for Canadians too, that this is happening organically, that this wave is coming out to vote for Conservatives. But for this to be effective, it has to not just be at the ballot box once every 4 years. And I'm a bit of we leave dinner parties, and my wife tells me that I'm way too political and you got to stop getting into it. But if you're at Tim Hortons and somebody's spouting off about how great this wind and solar project is, it's just like, Canadians have to stop being so polite, and we have to say, no, it's not. We're all paying too much for this electricity. It isn't going to be there when we need it.
We had brownouts in Alberta. I mean,
totally.
You know what I love about Alberta right now? This is what I've been trying to figure out, the difference between Alberta and Saskatchewan. And you've lived in both. Heck, you've represented Saskatchewan. So maybe I'll let you in and you can have your say. I look at it and I go, Alberta is really interesting to watch because they don't take no shit. I mean that just straight up. At times, you wish they would take just a little healthy, because you're like, why are we arguing about this? But their politics is as close as we got in Canada to the United States. And the United States is like, it's the World Wrestling Federation from literally the 90s. It is like, we're coming out, it's big stars, it's big everything. And Alberta, it has this they kind of treat it like wrestling. Like, there's just infighting, and some people don't like that. And I'm here to say, although I wish there was a little less fighting, I'm like, look at all the attention it brings to Alberta. The UCP AGM later this week, 6,000 people going to it. That's wild. So when you go, you got to be a little less political. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm that dinner. I have fallen into this trap, Tim, that I am now that dinner guest. That I'm like, I'm just trying to bite my tongue, just trying to bite it.
Yeah.
You know,
Nope.
you talk about
Let
the
it go.
windmills, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, what are the windmills made out of, folks? You know, like is it fairy dust? They just poof, we got wind, or is there something a little more to that? And is that like, are we going to do the full cost of what these things are, and then realize it ain't what it's built to be? I'm not saying you can't have wind, just saying as a supply chain, that's probably not the best thing. Not to mention it's subsidized by the government. It's like, it's just free money. Of course they're going to build them. Heck, if I had the money, I'd probably build them too.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's time for Canadians to start calling bullshit. And I'm seeing it more all the time, which gives me heart. But we can't think that this is a problem for our politicians. We need to win this discussion at dinner parties and coffee shops to enable the politicians to say, no, we're not putting that cost on our citizens.
Tim, I appreciate you hopping on and doing this. And, well, I guess we'll wait and see what the next 24 hours brings. Obviously, for folks listening to this, I apologize, because there's no way I was going to stay up till midnight, and then, you get the point. So this is right before the Sask election, which is going to be really interesting. And then, we got the U.S. election coming real fast, so some of this is going to happen real fast. But then, as we know with government, the pace of government, it's going to be a conversation I probably have for the next 20 years, because certain things, you can see the signals. It's going to take some time. But appreciate you hopping on, Tim, and giving us some of your thoughts today.
That was lots of fun.